please stand for an opening prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, it is good to be here tonight. As I said before, we are truly, truly blessed, and it is by your guidance that we chose to be here tonight. We could be on many different places, but I would say that this is the best place to be. And I'm so thankful also that you brought safely Dr. Ramirez together with his daughter. And I'm so thankful also that you gave him a clear mind to do the research, to see what is the best. And I pray that our minds and that our hearts will be open. And by your power, if there are some changes that we can make in our lives, that we'll be able to do with your strength, Lord. You're the one who created us. You know what is the best, Lord. And let us go to the basics and learn from you how you created us. Again, thank you for your guidance. Thank you for your protection. In the name of Christ, I pray. Amen. Please be seated.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It has been a little bit hard. We had to reschedule a few times, but I'm very glad to be here. Actually, just yesterday I was in California, in Weimar, and I was also in southern Mexico yesterday, in Cancun. But I'm glad that planes move fast and I'm able to move locations quite quickly. Before I start, I wanted to tell you a short story how I got myself into what is called lifestyle medicine. See, I originally studied computer science. That's what my major was. And I thought that what I was going to do with the rest of my life, you know, work with Oracle or IBM or Apple or one of these big computers. But when I was in my last semester in computer science, all my friends started running. And as I started running with them, I was always the one that ended at the last. And I said, no, that's not right, you know. I need to do something about this. I need to do something to improve my times. So what I did, I went to the library to read, what do the people that win the race eat? And that's where I discovered plant-based foods. And as I started implementing that into my own lifestyle, my times cut down so much that I actually was able to finish first place in most of the races. Not only that, my scores in that last semester improved dramatically to the point that it was all just straight A's. And once I finished my computer science degree, I had a brother in Southern California in the area of Palm Springs, was working with Dr. Charles Thomas, if you know who he is. I was supposed to go there for a weekend. I had applied to a master's degree in computer science. I got accepted to the program, and while I was waiting to start my master's program, I went to visit my brother just for a weekend. And when I got there, I realized that nobody knew about computers in that place, so those computers were a mess everywhere. So the doctor in charge heard that I knew about computers, and he asked for my help. Could you help us here while you're here this weekend? So in pretty much the whole weekend, I pretty much fixed most of the computer issues that they had there. The doctor in charge was so impressed that he said, would you consider joining our staff? I need somebody with this knowledge here as part of this team. And it was a hard decision because I was supposed to go into my master's program, and here he is, you know, offering me a job. And after much battle in my head, I decided to join that staff, and my life changed as a result of that. See, when I started seeing with my own eyes how when the people changed their diet, when the people started doing exercise, when they improved their sleeping patterns, and do all the other lifestyle changes, how many diseases were being reversed, such as diabetes, hypertension, depression, obesity, autoimmune problems, and all kinds of problems were being solved with intensive lifestyle changes. I said to myself, you know, computers are very nice, but this is what I need to do with my life. And later on, the opportunity came about so that I could join medical school, and I finished my medical degree. I also spent some time in the Black Hills. There's a lifestyle center there, really close to where Rushmore is. Also in Hawaii, working with Dr. Sang Lee. We would do lifestyle programs for both Koreans living in Korea, Koreans living in America, and also some for the general public. And also I spent many years in Norway. Actually, by the time I left Norway, I was starting to lecture in Norwegian there at that lifestyle center. My daughter, which is with me here tonight, she was actually born up there in Norway. Very interesting system they have there. They actually pay you when you have your baby. Okay? It gave us $3,000. Everybody is to encourage population growth, because there people like to have dogs and cats and not babies. So to encourage that, they do that. And currently I'm at Weimar. I work with Dr. Neil Nedley. People say that I look like him, you know. Maybe I'm the Spanish version of him. And I'm the director of research there, and also help Weimar do lots of research. Tomorrow, I don't have time tonight, but tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the type of research that we are doing, very cutting edge, showing that these interventions really work and they can actually have a big impact in the life of people. And here are a few resources if you want to follow up on some of the things that I am teaching you. I have a very active Twitter account. Dr. Nedley, for example, he is too busy, you know, with his, he's the president of Weimar and all the other things that he is doing. So I'm the one that finds all this information that he's showing on the screen. So when I find something interesting that I know he's gonna like, I post it there on that Twitter account, and then I also send him a copy. So you can get, you know, the latest on different topics, lifestyle, exercise, sleep, diet, and so forth. That's the Twitter account. And then that webpage, dreddyramirez.com, that one goes to a YouTube account, and there are multiple videos there that you can watch. I'm not selling absolutely anything, you know, this is all for free. There are many videos in Spanish, but there are some in English. And as the pastor was saying, I travel very much. So all the time there's new videos in actually different languages and so forth. And the last link, that one is where I have my research there. You can access all that research there. Again, all that is for free. ResearchGate, as I tell my friends, is like the Facebook for researchers, okay? So all the researchers have their account there. They put their research, and if you're interested in certain researchers, you can actually follow them. You subscribe for free, and anytime they are coming up with new papers, you can go ahead and receive that information. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about an extremely important topic. In fact, if you were to ask me, Doctor, from the three most important things that I need to know to take care of my health, what would be one of them? I would tell you, I want you to understand the concept of inflammation. Because the concept of inflammation is the common denominator that causes many diseases. And in fact, these topics, they build one to another. Tomorrow we'll be talking about how those changes in the lifestyle that you do, either for good or for worse, not only do they affect the general health, but they have an impact all the way down to your genes. You don't need to know about genetics and this type of things. I'm going to explain those things in a simple language, so don't miss it. And in the afternoon, I'm going to show you a fascinating program that is showing how, number one, you can prevent dementia even if you are coming from a family with issues with dementia. And number two, how somebody that is starting to have issues with dementia can literally stop the problem. So don't miss also the afternoon lecture tomorrow. As I travel around the world, I have seen an interesting thing. You know, disease follows a certain pattern. In other words, there are areas in the world where you find certain disease very much prevalent, lots of people have it. There are other areas in which it's more rare. For example, in the case of cancer, which area is very high in the world? Right here where your feet are standing, you know. Unfortunately, that is one of those geographical patterns. But the interesting thing is that when you put many different diseases, you find that there is a common pattern, such as diabetes, such as obesity. And when I'm saying there is a lot disease here and a little here, is because there is a huge difference. Just check the numbers between the prostate cancer, extremely common in America, unfortunately, and something extremely rare in Bangladesh. And the fascinating thing is that those people that live in Bangladesh, when they move to those high incidence places such as America, suddenly those numbers start to climb. And you can see in this other published study how, for example, breast cancer, unfortunately a very common problem here in America, in this study they were showing how as people move to areas in the world that have this high amount of cancer, suddenly the generations start to increase. Let me tell you how to interpret this graphic. When you see the red color, there is where you can see the first immigrants that moved to America, what rate of cancer they had. And then the second line is the daughters of those immigrants. And then the third line, the daughters of the other ones, and then the other ones, the daughters of the other ones. Where is this pattern leading us to? See, the disease is increasing as a result of those people acquiring the habits of that new country. And here you can see, for example, the difference in different cancers among three groups. On the blue, you see the Japanese people that live in Japan. The green one shows you those Japanese people that moved to Hawaii, part of America. And the yellow one will show you the white people, the Caucasians that live in Hawaii. Now, from those three groups, which two groups kind of look similar in the pattern? You can quickly tell that the Japanese in Hawaii and the Caucasians in Hawaii have kind of a similar pattern in the cancers they are showing, with two exceptions, with the exception of the stomach and the exception on the esophagus, written in the English from England way, by the way. So the reason why Japanese people have this higher is because of two patterns, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. Number one, those Japanese people have a very high intake of sake, this alcohol made out of rice. And number two, they have a very high consumption of smoked fish. And you'll learn a little bit more about the issues with smoke, especially animal products, and the effect that can potentially have on health. So let me show you this concept of inflammation. And I want you to use your memory and remember the last time you poke yourself with something, a needle, a nail, or something. I'm sure every single one of us have gone through that process. So try to remember that last time you poked yourself. Number one, what sensation was there that you felt? Was it something very nice and pleasurable? It was what? Painful. First symptom of inflammation. Okay? Inflammation is a response of your body of protection. As you can see in this graphic, once you break down those physical barriers that we have, bacteria, viruses, and other things get introduced in the body. And inflammation is the response of the body to stop that from happening. See, if you didn't have the response of inflammation, you could literally die of poking yourself with a needle. But because you have inflammation, you're able to stop this. So we saw the first symptom that we said, what was it? Pain. Okay. Now, if you were to compare where you poked yourself to the other finger that you didn't poke to, what color do you see where you poked yourself? Redness, second symptom of inflammation. So you have pain, you have redness. What else did you notice about the size from the part that you poked to the one you didn't? Swelling, another symptom of inflammation. And by the way, every single one of these things that are happening, they're happening for a reason. You felt pain so that you wouldn't keep your hand there, because you may poke yourself further. You pull out, okay? The reason why you are seeing redness is because blood and help is coming to the area to help aid with the different things that are arriving there, and so that their repairing can take place as soon as possible. And it's swollen because it's like when they have crime scene, you know. Unfortunately, something common here in Chicago, according to the newspaper. They put all this white tape around, yellow tape, isn't it? And it says, don't come in, you know, this area is protected. The same thing happens when something is swollen, you know. As it gets swollen, you are able to stop other things from coming in, and just the good guys are able to come in there, and they're able to go and fight the infection and help with the repairing of the process and so forth. So think about it. Who doesn't have an inflammatory response? If you poke with a needle at that person, do they feel pain? Does it get swollen? Does it get red? And so forth. See, no inflammation response. The reason why you have that inflammation is because that mechanism is there for a reason. And the fascinating thing is that since the time of the Romans, back then, you know, in the first century, when Jesus walked on this earth, the Roman physicians understood this concept of inflammation. And they called the symptoms by their Latin name, which is calor, which means heat, it gets warm, dolor, which means pain, rubor, which means red, and tumor, which doesn't mean cancer, it means that something grows, by the way, okay? That's what the word tumor means. So that inflammatory process is there for a reason. It's there because it's helping us stop the further damage and starts the healing process immediately as soon as that acute inflammatory response is there. But in the 1800s, a very wise German physician understood that actually that inflammation was not only acutely seen, but you could also see a chronic type of inflammation. And when he started seeing the pattern with his patients, he realized that most of the diseases that he was seeing, from Alzheimer's dementia to heart attacks to diabetes and you name it, it had a common denominator that all of these people had a chronic type of inflammation. Now, there are those two big types of inflammation. You have the acute inflammation. Acute inflammation should be solved with a matter of days or a couple of weeks. When you poke yourself with a needle, it's not like you have years and years with the inflammation going on there, isn't it? The problem gets solved, inflammation is stopped. But the problem with the chronic type of inflammation is that in most instances, there is no symptoms that you feel. See, when I have acute inflammation, I know I poked myself with that needle because I was grabbing something, oh, pain there, you know, I realized something was there. Oh yeah, I remember, last week I poked myself, and you can understand where that came from. But with chronic type of inflammation, you do not have those symptoms. And many people can have tremendous amount of inflammation and not realize it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I don't know if you have ever noticed how we doctors use lots of words with the ending itis. Oh, you have gastritis, you have colitis, you have bronchitis. Let me tell you this. Itis means inflammation. It makes sense now, isn't it? So whenever there is some inflammation somewhere on that particular organ, then they call it that itis name. So that inflammation, as it's causing certain problems, depending on the organ that is being affected, is the title that they get. Now, if that inflammation continues long term, cells start to change, genes start to change, and you end up with different diseases such as cancer. Before the cancer arrived, most probably there was some inflammation taking place, months, and in most instances, years and years. And modern science has a big focus on understanding this inflammation. And in parentheses, yes, there's a yin-yang there. I don't promote that thing, but it just happened to be in that journal. And that inflammation is something that, for example, pharmaceutical companies would love to have the right pill for that, don't you think? And that's why they invest so much money trying to understand it and trying to find that perfect pill that will stop that. Unfortunately, I have bad news for you. This is not going to be stopped with a pill, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. And inflammation, lifestyle, and chronic diseases, says this published article, there is a what link? If it's silent, do you realize that? See, that's the issue. How many times a patient has come to me, and as we're going through the clinical history, as we're going through the laboratories, I realize something is not right with that person. And I tell them, hey, we need to make some lifestyle changes. Things are not looking very good of what I'm seeing. And what does that person say? Changes. Oh, I don't need to change anything. I feel fine. But they don't realize this, in most instances, can't be silent. And the person is in big trouble, and they don't realize that. And that's why this journal Immunity, they ran a special issue on the topic of inflammation. They made an analogy to what? To fire. And that's the issue. Many people are burning inside of them, and they don't realize that. And that's why Time magazine ran a whole issue also about the topic of inflammation, and they call it what? The secret killer, because so many people get affected by inflammation and they don't realize it. And in the article itself of inflammation, it calls it the fires within. And that's why I like to teach my patients the following analogy. For example, you guys here in Chicago, I know here in the winter, it does get really cold here, isn't it? In fact, I was talking to the person, Caroline, that brought me here, and I was telling her that it's colder here than in Norway. In Norway, there's a current from the Gulf of Mexico that bathes the whole coast of Norway, and that's why people live all the way to the very north. You guys don't have that Gulf of Mexico current here. You have your current from the Lake Michigan here that becomes solid ice, isn't it? And then you guys are in really big trouble. So because of the cold, having a fireplace sometimes is something nice, isn't it? It warms up everything in the house and so forth, makes the place nice and cozy. But when that fire that is inside the fireplace starts to go out of where it's not supposed to be, what happens? Disaster comes about as a result of that fire being where it's not supposed to be. That is exactly chronic inflammation, the perfect analogy. You are putting fire where it's not supposed to be. See, with acute inflammation, when you poke yourself with a needle, your body had the ability to stop that inflammatory process when it wished. Once it finished repairing everything, your body turns it off. But with chronic inflammation, the body doesn't have that control to say, okay, let's shut down the inflammation, it's done. And you will learn, because of most times the lifestyle, the way people live, they just keep putting logs on that fire. And they get themselves in big trouble, because as they put more wood there, more fire comes about, and that actually makes the problem worse. And that's why you also have something that is called a stove in your home, because you have the ability to control the heat. Too much, too little, and you can move the little knob there and get just right on the money the heat that you want. But what happens when that fire goes out of that place where it's supposed to be? What ends up happening? Disaster comes as a result of that. So what are some of the common inflammatory sources that we can be exposed to and that help put those logs on the fire of inflammation? Number one, cigarette smoking. And I'll show you a fascinating study in a minute. Alcohol, any form of alcohol is inflammatory. One of the many reasons why you should not be putting that to your system. Also, too much sunlight can be inflammatory. Now, what's that definition of too much sunlight? What color does it get your skin if you have too much sunlight? Isn't that a symptom of inflammation? In fact, you see them all, Does it get swollen? Okay. Does it hurt? Okay. You can see every single one of those symptoms when there is too much sun. Now, one issue in America is that we actually don't get enough sun. Okay? And many people are having struggles with their vitamin D and so forth because they're not getting that sunlight from the outside as our ancestors used to do it. Our ancestors, most of them, used to work in agriculture, so they were out there, in the fields working, and they would be getting that nice vitamin D and so forth. So that balance, isn't it? Not too little, or also too much can be a source of inflammation. Beware of that. Animal products. Every animal products are inflammatory. And the reason why they're inflammatory, it has to do with biochemistry. Let me just tell you in a brief way how does this work, why they're so inflammatory. See, animal products are very high in something that is called arachidonic acid. It's a complicated word, but just think of that arachidonic acid. So, when there is too much arachidonic acid, think about it as the pieces of wood that you're throwing on the fireplace. When there is too much arachidonic acid, the body converts that into inflammation in your body. Now, let me tell you this interesting fact. Vegetables have arachidonic acid, but they have it in small amounts. Why is that? Because you need some arachidonic acid. Because when you are going to go and poke yourself with that needle, I need to start that inflammation process. And in order to start that inflammation process, I need some arachidonic acid on board. But too much arachidonic acid, you're throwing those pieces of wood on the fire. And also, having too much weight is very inflammatory to the body. I'll also tell you in a minute more about that. So, we know that when you put inflammatory things, you can create changes in the cell, and if you keep on doing that, you create that chronic inflammation, you end up with a cancer. Such as the experiments that the cigarette companies do. This is from a cigarette company laboratory in which they get the tar from the smoke from the cigarettes, and they paint that on the surface, on the skin of these mice, and in a matter of weeks, they start developing tumors and cancers. Why is that? Now you understand, isn't it? Because of the inflammation that you're causing there by exposing that piece of skin to chronic inflammation. And here it is, the same mouse. A few weeks later, you can see the cancer that is starting to grow there. And let me show you also something fascinating. There are other substances that are very inflammatory and very harmful and damaging to the brain. Here you're seeing a brain. If you were to see the brain from down to up, you can see in the little middle there how it goes down is because that's where the spine connects to the brain. Okay, that's that area there. This is a normal brain. There shouldn't be holes and things on it. But please notice when you expose this brain to different inflammatory things, what happens to this brain? For example, somebody that has been using for 3 years marijuana, look at what happened to that brain. And big conversation right now in America, isn't it? That, extremely inflammatory, and it causes plenty of harm. Now, let me tell you this. If you were to open the skull of this person and see the physical brain, you're not going to see a hole. What this scanner is detecting, is called a SPECT scan, is detecting the health of those neurons. So those neurons have been damaged as a result of that. What about somebody that uses just on the weekend? Still is quite harmful, that marijuana. That's the reason why Los Angeles Times recently ran an article that said, if you want to be a loser for the rest of your life, use marijuana. And that's because marijuana harms the frontal lobe where you have your motivation. And if there's no motivation to do things, you don't have that drive to achieve and so forth. Now, it's not only marijuana, the one that is harmful. Also, you can see here usage of alcohol, extremely inflammatory. Can you see the tremendous holes that it has caused all the way to the other side as a result of that? No wonder why the wives bring their husbands to me and said, "Doctor, but this is not the man I married." Well, yeah, there's some wisdom there. There's a totally different brain, from the one that she married. Now, if you, by the way, have used this type of substances in the past and so forth, there's still hope. The Bible says that where sin abounds, what does it say there? Grace abounds much more. So even if you have harmed your brain using these type of things, there's still grace there. Other parts of your brain that have not been damaged can take over that part. But first of all, I would suggest to you stop it, this type of behavior, because you're causing tremendous damage. And also heavy drugs such as heroin here. You can see the tremendous damage that has taken place. And somebody using tobacco products that got himself into a stroke. You can see the tremendous damage that is causing on the brain. So you can see here some of the sources of inflammation. As you can see, tobacco is actually quite high. And anytime I see a patient that smokes, I'm going to remind him that it is time to stop, isn't it? Now, according to this study, what is even more important than smoking? Diet. Diet is a very important source of inflammation. That's why, as I tell my patients, you have in your home something extremely dangerous. That is called the fork. Okay? What you poke with that fork can even be, doing your own grave, or giving you health. So be careful how you manage that fork, because you can cause tremendous inflammation in your body with that. And you can see issues with the weight there, infections, and you can see genes pollution. They have their effect, but they are smaller, the effect, compared to the other ones. And when you start understanding a little bit of the mechanisms inside the body for inflammation, you realize that this is something extremely complex. In fact, when they come about with these new medications to try to stop this, they end up stopping some of those things, but something else turns on there. And they turn off that other one, another one turns on, and it is a never-ending game. And as you can see here are some of the sources of inflammation. Now, please notice that stress by itself is something inflammatory. And this is something you have to learn to deal with that. I don't have much time tonight, but tomorrow afternoon we'll talk a little bit about that stress management, because you can be doing all the other things in a right way, but if anxiety and so forth are taking place in your life, you are causing inflammation just with that source. But you can also see that things like bacteria, like viruses, and pollution and so forth can have that inflammatory response also. And here in this published study, you can see that just the fact that you have excess weight, in what state are those cells? What does it say there? Pro-inflammatory state. Now, that's the bad news. Let me tell you the good news. The good news is that as soon as you start losing weight, you know what happened? Inflammation actually starts going down. And we see this at the Lifestyle Center, at Weimar. Patient comes and we can take laboratories, we can check inflammation, and as soon as they start doing the lifestyle change and they start shedding those pounds, inflammation quickly goes down. So if you have issues with your weight, don't despair. You just have to do your homework and start getting on the right program so that you can start shedding some of that weight. And it's because obesity has been linked to all kinds of cancers. And now we understand why, isn't it? Because you created that inflammatory state, which is a chronic type of inflammation, and that's why all the organs can suffer as a result of that. And here you can see some of those sources of inflammation. We talk about the ultraviolet light, we talk about the alcohol, the environment, but also the way you cook, you can actually increase the inflammation. Especially things that are smoked. As I was mentioning, you can create lots of inflammation there. And there is a difference if it's a vegetable or an animal product that is smoked. In a minute, I'll tell you more about it. Also bacteria, We know, for example, that Helicobacter pylori that lives in the stomach and some people, you create that chronic irritation, you create inflammation, and you can start having some issues with your stomach later on. And also viruses. The famous papilloma virus, I'm sure you must have heard about it, which is what causes the cancer on the male organ and the cancer on the female cervicouterine cancer. That cancer is a sexually transmitted cancer. You pass that. And you know what studies are showing? In public high schools, 3/4 of those young people have the human papillomavirus. Why is that? Because of their sexual behavior. Unfortunately, they are passing that. Now you're going to say, well, doctor, I heard there's a vaccination for that. Well, yes and no, there's a vaccination, but it only stops a handful of those viruses, about 6 of them. There's more than 100 different types of those viruses. So you may stop these ones, but you have plenty of those other ones that can also continue causing the issue. Cigarette, stress, as we mentioned, are sources of that inflammation. And it is interesting how even depression is being linked today with inflammation. As you have that type of chronic type of inflammation, the brain cannot work properly and you can end up with a depression. Here you can see an interesting marker. There's a marker called the NF-kappa beta. Sounds like really complex, but it's not. Think about that NF-kappa beta as the master switch of inflammation. When you turn on NF-kappa beta, we know that there is inflammation in the body. And you can see here how smoking one cigarette was enough to turn on that inflammation, not just for an hour, for a day, and even beyond a day. One cigarette. Now, unfortunately, the smoker doesn't smoke just one cigarette, isn't it? They keep on putting and putting and putting cigarettes. And what's happening there? There goes the logs, isn't it? More logs and logs and logs and logs. Fire comes out, and that's why cigarette smoking increases so much health problems. And we know that NF-kappa beta is affected by the type of food that you're eating. In this particular published study, they divided the group into 2 groups. One group, both of them were overnight fasting. One group stayed fasting in the morning. The other group ate the following meal, which consisted of some white bread, some eggs, some sausage, and some fried hash browns. rare food here in America? Unfortunately, quite common type of breakfast. And please notice what happened to that NF-kappa beta. You can see in the top graphic, NF-kappa beta starts shooting up. As soon as people ate that meal, that inflammation started going up. Compared to the people that stayed fasting, the inflammation stayed under control, no inflammation in the body. And this is the reality. If you were to eat this once a year, I mean, the reality is that it's not going to be that harmful. But unfortunately, people have an inflammatory breakfast, an inflammatory lunch, an inflammatory supper, and what's happening? Man, those logs, they just keep on going on the fireplace. No wonder we see that disease pattern here in America, isn't it? As a result of those poor choices over and over and over. And here you can see that the type of food that you put in your body changes even the type of bacteria that inhabit your digestive system. And we are understanding now that the type of bacteria that inhabit your digestive system have an effect on the general inflammation of the body. And as you put the wrong type of food, those bacteria that inhabit your stomach start to limit, and unfortunately you encourage the type of harmful type of bacteria that can also trigger inflammation. So not only you're triggering the inflammation by the food you're taking, you're changing the bacteria in your gut, and that different type of bacteria can also encourage inflammation. And you can see here how cigarette increases the cancer, and also this fascinating published study that shows that eating 2 pounds of charbroiled steak is equivalent as smoking how many cigarettes? Man, you're not just throwing the log, isn't it? You're throwing the whole tree on the fireplace. Why is this tremendous amount of inflammation? Because of the following. See, animal products are very deficient products. They don't have antioxidants in them. In fact, if you go to nature and observe what happens, for example, when a lion goes and kills one of those antelopes in nature, you're going to see that the first thing that that lion is going to eat is going to be the stomach full of that grass and vegetables that that animal was eating. And in that way, they're eating some antioxidants and so forth. But do we do that? What do we do? Make sure we clean every single piece of grass that was there, isn't it? And just eat the meat and so forth. So what ended up happening is that because those animal products are deficient in antioxidants, when you start putting that heat that starts changing the molecules, there is nothing that stops that inflammation. Compared to if you put some broccoli or some carrots there on the grill, those foods are rich in antioxidants, and as the heat is starting to cause changes, the antioxidants in those vegetables are stopping the damage. And that's why they're not as harmful as if you do this with any type of animal product. Chicken will do the same type of reaction regarding that. Plus, some of the saturated fat falls down on the hot charcoal. The molecule changes because of the heat, and it goes up in the smoke and sticks again there, and you eat that. That's why there's a big headache in public health. They don't know where to put the line. See, because if you cook it too much, this is what's happening to it. But if you don't cook it enough, these foods are extremely high in bacteria. I remember when we were in in a medical school in the laboratory checking microbiology, you get a little piece of chicken, fish, any animal product, and you put it in the microscope. There are rivers of bacteria there, alive there. You can see them as they are moving there. So as you can see, because of that animal product, that creates too much, they have too much arachidonic acid, you create inflammation, and that's why so many cancers are linked to that. So basically what we're learning tonight is that inflammation out of control, it's being caused by issues in the lifestyle, and that is causing all that chronic disease that we're seeing and cancer also. And we also learned tonight that itis, isn't it? As something gets irritated, you get that itis, you get that inflammation of the organ, and if you keep it inflamed, that's going to change and become something more serious. So we also learned tonight that NF-kappa beta is that regulator, is that switch that is turning on that inflammation in our body. And as I mentioned to you, that NF-kappa beta, since it triggers inflammation, all kinds of disease are directly related to turning on that NF-kappa beta. So the question comes tonight: is inflammation your friend or your enemy? What would it be? Depends how you treat it, isn't it? If you didn't have inflammation when you poke yourself with a needle, you will die of a sepsis. All the bacteria will multiply and you will die. So inflammation can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending how are you treating your body. So chronic inflammation, chronic disease are quite related. So chronic disease is the result of that chronic inflammation in that body. So probably you are thinking tonight, well, doctor, if inflammation is fire, I want the fire extinguisher, isn't it? So we can stop that inflammation. Where can we find that fire extinguisher? Let me just show you how medication is not the fire extinguisher. This is a recent article from the New York Times in which they were reviewing a little bit about the current treatments for prostate cancer. And you can see in the second column that medication, that it cost how much? $93,000 per treatment. Now that's quite a bit of money, isn't it? You can buy in some places a house for that amount. How effective it is? Well, instead of living 21.7 months, you're going to live 25.8 months. Is that too much difference? What's the difference there? That you're probably gonna die poor, isn't it? That's gonna be the difference after paying for that $93,000 treatment. So medication is not gonna be the answer of this. As New York Times recently ran an article that said the Sloan School of Management at MIT and the Harvard Business School has created a farmers from medication pharma market. However, we need what? The farmers with F market. So we need to run to the farmer market. That's where we're going to find that extinguisher. And you know, since 2,500 years, Hippocrates correctly said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So this is what we need to do. We need to have a diet rich in those anti-inflammatory substances. Where do we find that? Well, we have plenty of those foods available here in America. We have the fruits and vegetables. And as I tell my patients, I want you to eat the whole rainbow. Okay? There are fruits and vegetables that are black, yellow, white, blue, purple, red. I want you to eat all the colors. I notice some people just eat banana. You're deceiving yourself, okay? You're not eating the whole rainbow. Make sure you're eating vegetables and fruits with all those colors, because each different color has different properties. Okay? Now you don't tell me, well, doctor, I saw it in the market, but I don't know how to cook it. Well, that's why God invented the internet. Okay? You buy it and you Google there. How do you cook, such and such vegetable? You're gonna find plenty of recipes and ways of cooking that. Also, you need to eat cereals and something that unfortunately are not being very much eaten here in America, legumes. Your diet, that should be one of the pillars of your diet. What are those legumes? Those beans, those lentils, garbanzos, fava beans, and they're all in the same section in your marketplace. That should be something that you actually eat every day, those type of foods. And finally, you need some spices. But let me tell you the principle. We said that things that are irritating are what? Inflammatory. So the rule is the following. We need to eat spices that are not spicy. Okay? So things like your black pepper and this thing out of your house, But things like turmeric, this is something that you should eat many times a week. Okay, that is one of the most anti-inflammatory substances that we know of. And don't just take the capsule. Learn how to cook with this. Again, the internet there's lots of recipes there. It gives a good flavor to your food and so forth. So, as we can see, there is a battle going on there. Things that are promoting the cancer and things that are stopping the cancer. How does this story end up? Well, it depends which of these factors end up dominating. That's why the homework for tonight is for you to try to analyze your lifestyle and see which of those inflammatory things you may be encouraging in your life, and try to eliminate as many of those as possible. And we're going to increase those anti-inflammatory substances that are going to help us stop. And there's many more things that are inflammatory. We don't have time to talk about it. But one of the big problems here in America also is sugar. Excess sugar is very inflammatory. Beware of that. Lots of things have that sugar hidden in some form. So to me, it's very interesting how from the very beginning in the Bible, it talks about the perfect anti-inflammatory diet. Fascinating, isn't it? We read about that in Genesis 1:29. It says, "Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be what? Your anti-inflammatory food." Here are those good antioxidants. And see, we're discovering that there are more than 3,000 therapeutic substances in those fruits and vegetables. Now imagine taking 3,000 pills a day. You don't need to. What do we need to do? We need to follow this anti-inflammatory rich diet. And beware of those people that are going to come to you. you need to buy this berry from I don't know which exotic forest there. You know, it's going to cost you $600, the little pill bottle there. Don't waste your money with those things. What you need to do, you need to eliminate those inflammatory things from your diet and add those anti-inflammatory substances. So may God bless you, and I hope that you can start implementing some of these principles. And the good news is that even if that fire is starting to come